The endless hum of the spaceship echoed through the cold corridors as Captain Eric Shaw stood at the helm of the Vanguard, a state-of-the-art human warship ready to face the enemy head-on. The year was 2147, and humanity was at war with the mighty Zerathian Empire, a race of aliens who had once been peaceful allies, but now sought to control the galaxy through force. The battle had raged for hours in the deep reaches of space. The Vanguard was holding its own against the Zerathian fleet, but the odds were quickly turning against them. The sky above Earth had darkened with the shadows of enemy ships, their immense sizes dwarfing the human fleet. Captain Shaw had led his crew with confidence and bravery, but no one could ignore the crushing pressure bearing down on them. "Captain, we've lost the starboard wing. Shields are failing," shouted Lieutenant Torres, her voice crackling through the comms. Shaw gritted his teeth. He had no time to worry about his own ship. His crew was trained to handle whatever came their way. What mattered now was stopping the Zerathian ships before they could launch a devastating blow to Earth itself. A sudden warning blared across the control room. Zerathian flagship approaching at maximum speed. The enemy's leader, the Zerathian king, Zaldor, was on board. His reputation for ruthlessness had spread across the galaxy. If they could neutralize the king, the battle might just turn in their favor. "Prepare to engage," Shaw ordered, his voice cold but steady. "We can't let that ship through." As the Vanguard closed the distance between them and the enormous Zerathian flagship, Shaw's heart raced. The massive ship was sleek and deadly, its hull covered in dark scales that seemed to shimmer like liquid metal. The flagship was like a floating fortress, brimming with weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single shot. And inside that ship was Saldor, the king who had led his people into war against humanity. Just then, a terrifying explosion rocked the Vanguard, sending the ship into a violent spin. Shaw was thrown against the control panel, pain shooting through his side. But he gritted his teeth and fought to keep control. "Status," Shaw barked. "We've lost power in the aft section. They've breached our defenses." Torres replied, panic in her voice. Before Shaw could respond, the comms crackled again. This time, it was a message from the Zerathian flagship. "Human captain," a deep, commanding voice echoed. "You are too weak to defeat us. Surrender now or face the consequences." It was Kaldor, the Zerathian king. His voice was calm, but there was a coldness to it that sent a chill down Shaw's spine. But Shaw wasn't one to back down easily. He had a responsibility to his crew and to humanity. "We'll never surrender," Shaw said, his voice steady. "We fight for Earth." Suddenly, the battle intensified. Zerathian cannons fired a barrage of energy blasts, their bright blue beams slicing through space like lightning. Shaw's ship was taking heavy fire, and he knew that if they didn't act fast, it would be over for them. The Zerathian flagship was too powerful to defeat head-on, and Shaw knew it. But there was one option left. He looked at Torres, who was staring at him, understanding flickering in her eyes. Initiating the maneuver, Shaw said, and with a swift motion, he slammed his hand down on the controls. The Vanguard veered off course, diving straight toward the heart of the Zerathian flagship. It was a risky move, one that could either destroy them or give them the chance they needed to win. "Captain, are you insane?" Torres yelled. "That's suicide." Shaw's eyes were locked on the enemy ship, the dark shadow of the flagship looming closer by the second. "I'm not aiming for the ship," he said grimly. "We're going for the core. If we can disrupt the Zerathian power systems, we can take them down." He pressed the throttle to maximum, and the Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring with intensity. But as they closed in on the flagship, disaster struck. A Zerathian ship, trying to intercept the human maneuver, fired a direct blast at the Vanguard, and the blast hit the ship's engines. Everything went dark. The ship was shaking violently, alarms blaring across the control room. Shaw struggled to keep his seat as the entire Vanguard was pulled into a chaotic tumble through space. He could hear the crew shouting orders, but their voices were drowned by the deafening sounds of destruction. Then, everything stopped. Shaw was thrown forward as the ship crashed into a massive, unseen force. The blaring alarms fell silent, and the shaking stopped. The emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in an eerie red glow. We've crashed, Torres gasped. Shaw struggled to get up, pain shooting through his body as he stood. He gripped the side of his chair for support, trying to regain his focus. He could barely see anything through the smoke and debris, but he knew that they had somehow made it. Barely. They had crashed right into the enemy flagship. He quickly gathered himself and turned to his crew. Prepare for a boarding mission. We need to take out their core systems before they can regroup. Torres nodded, already gathering her team. But Shaw's mind was elsewhere. He knew the Zarathian flagship's core was heavily guarded, but it was the only way to neutralize the threat. As Shaw prepared to lead his team into the unknown, something unexpected happened. The main comms crackled once more. "This is King Saldor," the voice came, but it was different this time. More personal, almost curious. "Human Captain, you have done the impossible. You've made it aboard my ship, but you are a fool if you think you can defeat me." Shaw's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just any ordinary message. It was an invitation. He clenched his fist. "I don't need your invitation, King Saldor. I'm coming for you." As Shaw and his team prepared to board the enemy ship, he had no idea what awaited them. But one thing was clear. The rescue of his crew was just the beginning of something much bigger. The King's life was now in his hands, and nothing was going to stop Shaw from completing his mission. He had no choice but to push forward, knowing the risks, and facing the possibility of becoming a galactic hero or a casualty of war. Captain Eric Shaw had barely recovered from the wreckage of the Vanguard when the Zarathian flagship loomed over him like a dark, monstrous shadow. The ship, a massive floating city of steel and shimmering alien metal, seemed alive in the cold void of space. Shaw knew the crew was lucky to still be alive. A few of his soldiers were injured, but most of them had made it through the crash. However, there was little time to waste. "Prepare to board," Shaw ordered, his voice trained but firm. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but there was no other choice. The mission to neutralize the enemy had just taken a terrifying new turn. They had to infiltrate the heart of the Zarathian Empire if they were going to stop this war. As Shaw's team gathered their weapons and equipment, his mind raced. The Zarathians had always been known for their warrior culture and their fierce loyalty to their king. Saldor, the king, was unlike any ruler Shaw had ever faced. The sheer power and arrogance in his voice when he spoke over the comms had left a mark on Shaw's soul. But now, as they prepared to move deeper into the enemy ship, Shaw couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this encounter. The Hall of Kings. When Shaw and his team reached the central command deck of the Zarathian flagship, they found themselves in an enormous hall, its walls lined with statues of ancient Zarathian rulers. The architecture was overwhelming. Smooth, jagged edges, and glowing blue veins that ran like rivers through the walls. The air was thick with the smell of strange, exotic spices and something Shaw couldn't quite place. As they moved through the dimly lit hall, Shaw couldn't help but feel like they were trespassing in a sacred space. Every step echoed, a reminder that this was no ordinary battlefield. They had infiltrated the heart of the enemy's power, and it wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about survival. The Vanguard was crippled, and they were alone on a hostile ship. Suddenly, Shaw's wrist comms buzzed. He activated it, and the familiar, deep voice of King Saldor filled the room. "Captain Shaw, you've done well to make it this far," Saldor said, his tone smooth and condescending. "But I believe you're about to witness something far more interesting." Before Shaw could respond, the doors at the far end of the hall opened with a resounding hiss. Two guards, massive creatures with sharp, glowing eyes, stepped aside, revealing a throne room bathed in a cold, eerie light. And there, sitting upon the throne, was Princess Nerissa. The princess. She was unlike anyone Shaw had ever seen. Her silver skin seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and her eyes, glowing a soft violet, pierced through the shadows. A crown of twisting, glowing vines rested atop her head, and her posture was regal, yet there was an undeniable tension in her gaze. She didn't look like someone who was captive or coerced into this arrangement. No, she looked like someone who had seen the weight of power and had made peace with it, though something about her hinted at a deep, unspoken sorrow. For a moment, Shaw froze, unsure of what to make of this new development. The human captain had expected to confront Isildur directly, perhaps face some kind of challenge for the king's life, but this was not at all what he had anticipated. "Captain Shaw," Nerissa said, her voice unexpectedly soft but carrying an air of command. "I have been waiting for you." Her words caught Shaw off guard. She spoke with a kind of authority that was common among royalty, but there was a strange gentleness behind her tone. "Waiting for me?" Shaw asked, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Nerissa's eyes locked onto his. "You've come to destroy my brother, haven't you?" Shaw's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "We've come to stop the war, to end the fighting." She smiled, but it was not a smile of warmth. It was knowing, almost sad. "The war will end, but not the way you think," she said cryptically. "And as for my brother, King Isildur, he's not who you think he is. None of us are." At that moment, Shaw heard a movement behind him. He turned to see Isildur, the towering alien king, striding into the room with a presence that sent a chill down Shaw's spine. His black, armored robes shimmered with an unnatural light, and his face was set in a permanent expression of regal detachment. "Enough talk." Isildur's deep voice thundered as he walked toward Shaw and Nerissa. "You've come this far, Captain Shaw. But I'll tell you now, your journey ends here." Shaw instinctively stepped back, his hand hovering near his weapon, but something in Nerissa's gaze held him still. "Brother, please," Nerissa interjected, her tone unexpectedly pleading. "We don't have to do this. There's another way." Isildur's eyes flickered to her, a mix of irritation and something darker crossing his face. For a brief moment, it was as if Shaw saw a crack in the king's impervious armor, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You have no place in this, Nerissa," Isildur snapped. "This human is here to take my life, to take everything from us. He will be rewarded for his treachery." Shaw's heart pounded. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to stop the bloodshed, but standing before the throne of the most powerful alien ruler in the galaxy, he had little choice. And then Isildur did something that made Shaw's blood run cold. He turned toward his sister and spoke words that no one could have predicted. "You, Nerissa, are my gift to this human," he declared. The gift. The words hit Shaw like a punch to the stomach. He stared at Isildur, unsure if he had heard him correctly. His mind raced. A gift. What did that mean? Was this some kind of cruel joke? Or worse, some twisted part of alien tradition that he could never hope to understand? Nerissa's face fell, but only for a moment. She stood and stepped away from the throne, looking at her brother with a mixture of anger and resignation. She didn't say anything, but Shaw could feel the tension in the room. "King Isildur," Shaw said, his voice trembling slightly with disbelief. "I don't want your sister. I'm not here for this, whatever this is." Isildur's cold, unblinking stare met Shaw's. "You misunderstand, human. It is not a choice you get to make. In my culture, saving my life demands a price. And you, Captain Shaw, have paid it." Shaw's jaw clenched, and he glanced at Nerissa. The last thing he wanted was to be a part of whatever twisted ritual this was. But Nerissa wasn't looking at him with fear. No, she was looking at him with something else. Perhaps understanding. Perhaps hope. "I allowed this," she said quietly, her voice not quite a whisper but enough for Shaw to hear. "This is my choice." The words hit Shaw like a lightning bolt. Nerissa wasn't just the gift. She had agreed to this. Why? What was she thinking? But before Shaw could ask, Saldor raised a hand, silencing the room. "Take her," the king commanded. "She belongs to you now." Shaw looked at Nerissa once more, his heart racing. He had no idea what kind of cultural mess he had walked into, but he knew one thing. This wasn't what he signed up for. The moment of decision. As the king's guards moved forward, Shaw stepped in front of Nerissa, instinctively protecting her. He was a soldier, and his duty was clear. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a royal court, and Shaw's mission had just taken an unexpected turn. He had just been thrust into a web of royal politics, alien customs, and a deeply tangled situation that threatened to pull him into something much larger than a simple military conflict. He stared into Nerissa's eyes, looking for some sign of what she truly wanted. For the first time, she spoke again. "Captain," she said, her voice calm, "don't make this harder than it has to be. We both know that I'm not your enemy." Shaw hesitated. This was no ordinary mission. But then again, nothing about this war had ever been ordinary. Nerissa had given him a glimpse into the complicated world she came from, a world where loyalty, honor, and duty meant something entirely different. He wasn't sure how he felt about all of it, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to be as simple as completing a mission. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for something far greater than victory. The moment Saldor, the Zarathian king, made his shocking declaration, offering his sister, Princess Nerissa, as a gift to Captain Eric Shaw, the air in the throne room seemed to thicken. Shaw's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The concept of gifting a person like this was foreign and bizarre to him. He couldn't understand it. He had expected the king to be cruel, but this felt like something else entirely. Nerissa, the princess, had not reacted as Shaw had expected. The moment Saldor spoke, she didn't show fear or anger. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly, and for a brief second, Shaw saw a flicker of something more, a deep sorrow, as though she had been prepared for this moment for a long time. It wasn't a look of submission, but of resignation. Shaw swallowed hard, his instincts telling him to reject this entire situation. He hadn't come here to get caught in the political webs of an alien empire. He had come to stop a war. He had come to protect his people. But now, the line between enemy and ally seemed to blur. "Princess Nerissa," Shaw began, trying to sound as calm as possible. This isn't how I imagined this going. I don't want your brother's gift. I came here for peace. I came to end this war." Nerissa stood up from her throne, her presence radiating authority and grace. Even though she was the sister of the most powerful king in the galaxy, she held herself in a way that made it clear she was no helpless victim. Shaw had thought her quiet and reserved when he first laid eyes on her, but now he saw something different, a fire beneath that cool exterior. "You misunderstand, Captain," Nerissa said softly but firmly. Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable edge to it. "My brother's gift may be his way of honoring your victory, but that does not mean you are the one who must accept it. Not if you understand what's really at stake here." Shaw blinked. What did she mean by that? Her words only confused him further. How could someone like her, an alien princess from a powerful empire, be so willing to accept such a twisted tradition? How could she stand there, so composed, in the face of such an outrageous offer? "I don't understand," Shaw said, his voice rough. "How can you just accept this? You're a princess. You should be able to make your own choices." Nerissa looked at him, her violet eyes soft but intense. "You're right. I should be able to make my own choices, but I don't have that luxury, Captain Shaw. My life has never been my own to begin with." Shaw felt his heart tighten in his chest. There was something in her words, a quiet sadness, that tugged at him. He didn't fully understand her culture, but he knew what it felt like to be bound by duty and responsibility. He had grown up in the military, where every decision was made for the greater good, and personal desires often took a backseat. But to hear Nerissa speak like this, it made him wonder how much of her life had been determined by forces outside her control. "You don't have a choice?" Shaw asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nerissa shook her head slowly. "Not really. In my world, the line between duty and personal freedom is often blurred. My brother, the king, is bound by the ancient laws of our people. And I am the daughter of the Zarathian royal family. My life has always been a symbol of power, of unity. For as long as I can remember, my purpose has been to serve the empire and secure its future." Shaw's brow furrowed as he tried to process her words. He had heard of the Zarathian monarchy's strict customs, but hearing it from her made it seem so much more personal, so much more painful. To be a person of such importance, yet to be trapped by your very status. Shaw couldn't imagine living like that. "I didn't ask for any of this," Nerissa continued, her voice steady, but tinged with a quiet bitterness. "My brother, he thinks this gift will end the war, that by offering me to you, the human captain who saved his life, he will somehow fulfill an ancient promise. But the truth is, this gift is nothing more than a political pawn. It's his way of ensuring that I stay in the role he's chosen for me." Shaw could see the pain in her eyes now, clearer than ever. She wasn't a cold, distant princess. She wasn't some object to be passed between men in power. She was a person, caught in a system far larger than herself, a system that dictated her life. And she hated it. Nerissa turned her gaze away from Shaw, looking out over the vast expanse of the throne room, her fingers lightly brushing the cold stone of the throne. "I never asked to be a symbol. I never asked to be a part of this Game of Thrones. But my brother believes that by offering me to you, I will be an asset, something that could unite our people. That by marrying the one who saved his life, we can avoid war, bring peace between humans and Zarathians." She paused, as if the weight of those words was heavy on her shoulders. "But that's not how peace works," she added, her voice softer now. "Peace isn't something you can trade, Captain Shaw. It's something that has to be earned." Shaw's mind spun. He had heard of political alliances, of treaties forged through marriage, but this was different. This wasn't some simple royal arrangement. This was real. This was a woman who had been given no choice, no agency over her own future. And the more Shaw listened to her, the more he realized that Nerissa's position was far more complex than he had initially thought. The decision. Shaw took a deep breath, his mind still trying to make sense of the situation. He had come to the Zarathian flagship with one goal, to stop the war. But now he was faced with a far more personal decision. "Princess," Shaw began, his voice thoughtful, "I came here to end the war, not to be a part of some political game. But you're right. Peace isn't something that can be traded. It has to be earned." Nerissa looked at him sharply, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "What are you saying?" Shaw's eyes softened, and he stepped closer to her. "I'm saying that I don't want to be a part of your brother's gift. I don't want to make you my prize, my reward. You're not some offering. You're a person, and I will fight for peace in a way that respects that." Nerissa's expression changed then. For the first time since Shaw had arrived, she seemed to soften. Her gaze held something akin to hope, a glimmer of something she hadn't shown before. "You would do that?" she asked, almost as though she couldn't believe it. "You would risk everything, your life, your mission, just to protect my freedom?" Shaw met her gaze, his expression serious. "I've risked my life for a lot of things, Princess, but no one should have to live like you have, caught between duty and personal desires. You deserve a choice, just like anyone else." Nerissa stepped forward, her voice stronger now. "And what will you do with that choice, Captain Shaw? If you refuse to accept the king's offer, what will happen to you? What will happen to us?" Shaw paused, considering her question. He didn't have all the answers, But one thing was certain. He couldn't back down now. The lines had been drawn, and if peace were to be achieved, it would require far more than political gestures and empty promises. It would require real change, real understanding. "We'll figure it out," Shaw said quietly. Together, the galaxy's media exploded with reactions. News anchors, both in human-controlled space and alien territories, debated the implications of Shaw's actions. Some hailed him as a hero, a symbol of resistance against the overwhelming power of the Zerethians. Others condemned him for rejecting a peace offer, unsure of what the future would hold now that the king had been disrespected in such a public way. A turning point for humanity. On Earth, President Olivia Hart sat in her office, watching the live feeds of Shaw's rejection of the king's offer. She had been briefed on the situation in real time, and as the footage played out, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. Shaw's actions would have far-reaching consequences, whether they led to peace or war. "Do you think he did the right thing?" General Thomas Ryder asked, standing next to her as they both watched the feed. His voice was filled with concern. Shaw just turned down an offer that could have ended the war. "Do we really want to risk more bloodshed?" Olivia leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping against the surface of her desk. "I don't know. But I know this. Captain Shaw didn't just reject the offer because of pride. He saw something that we couldn't. The war isn't just about politics or strategy. It's about people, Thomas. And what Shaw did was a stand for human dignity. He didn't just think of the short-term peace he might gain by accepting the king's offer. He thought of the future, a future where we're not beholden to alien rulers." The general didn't say anything for a long time. He simply watched the broadcast, the weight of Shaw's actions sinking in. The political fallout from this moment would likely be huge, but whether it led to peace or war depended on how both sides responded. The Zerathian response. Back on the Zerathian flagship, King Zaldor was not pleased. His face, typically unreadable, now showed a deep furrow of anger. He paced back and forth in the grand hall, his thoughts racing. His sister, Nerissa, remained silent, watching him carefully, waiting for him to speak. "You've made a fool of me," Zaldor finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you realize what you've done, Nerissa?" His rejection was a public insult. "It has made us seem weak in the eyes of the galaxy. We cannot show mercy to such disrespect." Nerissa stood with her back straight, her hands folded in front of her. "It is you who do not understand, Zaldor. Shaw did not reject you because of weakness. He rejected the system that has trapped us all. You are blinded by the idea of power, but peace cannot be achieved through force alone." Shaw's rejection was not a threat. It was a challenge. Zaldor clenched his fists at his sides, but Nerissa's words seemed to break through, even if only for a moment. He stopped pacing and looked at his sister. "You speak of peace, but peace is not free, Nerissa. It requires sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice your honor for the sake of peace?" Nerissa's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to her brother. Sometimes, the greatest honor comes from the ability to change, to evolve. Shaw may have rejected the gift, but he has also given us something valuable, a chance to redefine who we are as a people. Zaldor's eyes narrowed again. It was clear he wasn't ready to accept her perspective, but his sister's words had planted a seed. The question was whether or not he would allow it to grow. The galaxy's shift. As the days passed, the galaxy reacted in a whirlwind of emotions. The war between humans and Zerathians had been building for years, but now, thanks to Captain Shaw's actions, it seemed that something had changed. The idea of peace wasn't just a lofty dream anymore. It was becoming a possibility. All across the galaxy, protests erupted, both in favor of and against Shaw's decision. Some rallied behind the idea of peace and the possibility of ending the war through understanding and mutual respect. Others saw Shaw's rejection as a dangerous provocation, a step away from any hope of an easy resolution. In the streets of human cities, crowds gathered to watch the news, their eyes fixed on the broadcasts of Shaw's defiance. There was a sense of unity among the people of Earth, as though Shaw's courage had reignited a spark of hope in their hearts. Maybe they could win this war, not by fighting with weapons, but by standing firm in their belief that peace was worth fighting for. Nerissa's eyes softened, and for the first time, Shaw saw a real smile on her face. A smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment, for someone to finally see her as more than just a royal figure, more than just a symbol. The new path. For the first time since he had boarded the Zarathian flagship, Shaw felt a sense of clarity. He hadn't come here to take part in political games or to take anything from anyone. He had come to stop the war, to save lives. But now, standing in front of Nerissa, he realized that true peace could only come through understanding, not through gifts, not through forced alliances, but through choice. Together, Nerissa repeated softly, as if the word itself held the power to reshape everything. And with that, a new chapter began, not just for Shaw and Nerissa, but for the future of both humans and Zarathians. It was no longer about winning a battle. It was about winning hearts and minds. And that was something neither war nor politics could control. The moment Captain Eric Shaw had rejected King Saldor's offer, the gift of Princess Nerissa, the air in the throne room seemed to shift. Shaw had expected a confrontation, maybe even a fight. But the king simply stood there, his cold, unblinking gaze fixed on Shaw, as if he were measuring him. And yet, beneath that icy mask of authority, there was something else, a flicker of surprise. Nerissa, too, seemed taken aback. She had probably thought Shaw would just accept what was being offered, that he would play along with the alien customs of her people. But instead, Shaw had defied the king, defied the very expectations that had governed her life. And now, standing in the center of this alien world, the consequences of their actions began to ripple outward. After Shaw's refusal, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. The Zarathian guards, towering figures of strength, shifted uncomfortably, their weapons still drawn but unmoving. No one seemed to know what to do. Shaw had not only rejected the king's offer, but also, in a sense, rejected the very idea of his culture. For a moment, Shaw wondered if he had made a grave mistake, but the determined look in Nerissa's eyes told him that, for once, he had done the right thing. "Captain Shaw," Saldor said, his voice low but carrying an undeniable power, "you have no idea what you've done." Shaw took a step forward, standing tall despite the massive presence of the king before him. "I've done exactly what I had to do. I came here to end a war, not to take part in some sick power play. If peace is going to happen, it won't be because you used your sister as a bargaining chip." Zaldor's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a thin, humorless smile. "You think this is a game, human. You think your actions don't have consequences. You are standing in the heart of my empire, and you have just made an enemy of the most powerful person in the galaxy." Shaw didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to make enemies, Zaldor. I'm trying to stop one. You've made a choice, and I've made mine. Now we'll see which one leads to peace." Nerissa stepped forward, standing between the two men. "Enough, both of you," she said, her voice firm and commanding. "You're both too stubborn to see beyond your pride. Captain, you don't understand the depths of what's happening here. And Saldor, you've lived your life thinking that the galaxy revolves around power and strength. But you're wrong. If you truly wanted peace, you would listen." There was a brief moment of silence as Saldor regarded his sister. His sharp eyes flickered between her and Shaw, but it was clear he had no words to say. The tension in the room had reached its peak, and Shaw knew that something had to give. This moment would shape the future for not only him and Nerissa, but for the entire galaxy. The news spreads. What happened in the Zarathian flagship did not stay there for long. As soon as word of Captain Shaw's rejection of the king's gift spread, it sent shockwaves through the galaxy. News outlets, both human and alien, were quick to pick up the story. The conflict between humans and the Zarathians had been escalating for months, with no end in sight. But Shah's refusal to play into the Zarathian royal politics, his rejection of Nerissa, was more than just an act of defiance. It was a symbol of hope, a symbol of resistance. Humanity's alliance with other species had always been fragile, and the political tension was already high. But Shah's refusal to be part of an ancient and barbaric tradition sent a clear message. Humans would not submit to alien customs, no matter how powerful the ruler or the empire. In the aftermath, politicians, military leaders, and even civilians from both sides of the war began to speak out. Some saw Shah's decision as an act of bravery, a necessary stand against the oppressive traditions of the Zarathian Empire. Others, however, saw it as a foolish mistake that could lead to more bloodshed. The response from the Zarathian Empire, however, was less clear. Some Zarathians, particularly among the military and the more conservative factions of the royal court, saw Shah's rejection as an insult that could not go unpunished. But others, especially those who had grown weary of the constant fighting, began to question their own king's methods. Was it possible that Shah had offered a path to peace? The galaxy was a vast and mysterious place, filled with countless worlds, each with its own secrets, challenges, and hidden dangers. Captain Eric Shaw had stepped into the heart of an intergalactic struggle, thinking his mission was straightforward, to stop a war. But with each passing day, he was beginning to realize that the war between the humans and the Zarathians was only the surface of a much darker, more insidious threat. Something had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Shah had spent weeks negotiating with the Zarathian Empire, trying to keep the peace and bring an end to the fighting. But ever since his rejection of King Zaldor's offer to gift Princess Nerissa to him, things had become far more complicated. The political atmosphere was charged, with people from both sides of the war either praising or condemning Shah's actions. It felt like the galaxy was teetering on the edge of chaos, and in the midst of it all, Shah had begun to notice something strange, a sense of unease that seemed to be spreading, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. But what had truly caught Shah's attention wasn't just the rising tension between the human and Zarathian factions. It was something much more subtle. The threat that had been hiding in plain sight. The warning. It started on a quiet evening, while Shah was reviewing intelligence reports from his mission on the Zarathian flagship. He sat in his small quarters, the flickering light from his tablet casting shadows on the walls. The room was dimly lit, and Shah's mind was occupied with countless thoughts about the future. Peace still seemed possible, but it wasn't guaranteed. He knew the king would not let go of his pride easily, and the situation could unravel quickly. Suddenly, his comms device buzzed. A message appeared on the screen, but it wasn't from any official source. It was a coded transmission, one that Shah immediately recognized as coming from an unknown ally, someone who had been tracking the situation closely. He opened the message carefully, his fingers moving swiftly over the device's touchscreen. Captain Shaw, the message began. This is not a warning you will want to hear, but it is one you must heed. The peace you are fighting for is not the only battle you must face. There are forces at play here far older and more dangerous than you can imagine. Do not trust everything you see. Your mission may seem straightforward, but a hidden threat is looming, and it is coming for both you and the Zarathians. Shah's heart skipped a beat. The message continued. There are those within the Zarathian Empire who are not interested in peace. They have been using the war as a cover for something much darker, something that could destroy not just your people, but every living being in this galaxy. The transmission ended there, leaving Shah with more questions than answers. He stared at the screen, trying to process what he had just read. The message had come from someone who knew more than they were letting on, someone who had insight into the inner workings of the Zarathian Empire. But who could it be? And why were they reaching out to him? The message had made one thing painfully clear. The danger was far from over. The Zarathian underbelly. Shah's mind was racing as he tried to make sense of the cryptic warning. He knew that the Zarathian Empire, with its rigid power structures and ancient traditions, had more than its fair share of political intrigue. But what was the hidden threat? And why hadn't anyone spoken of it before? He couldn't shake the feeling that something was being kept from him. Something that, if uncovered, could shatter everything he thought he knew about the situation. Later that night, Shaw met with Princess Nerissa in a secure location aboard the Zarathian flagship. They sat in a small private room away from prying eyes, a place where they could speak freely without fear of being overheard. Shaw had grown to trust Nerissa over the past few weeks. Her intelligence, her resilience, and her willingness to fight for peace made her a valuable ally. But now, Shaw was starting to wonder if there was more to her story than he had been told. "Nerissa," Shaw began, his voice serious. "I've just received a message. It's from an anonymous source, but it's clear that someone knows something we don't. There's a hidden threat, something dangerous lurking in the shadows, and it's tied to the Zarathian Empire.